Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today to be in conversation with Holly Black. I am thrilled to be talking today with one of my all-time favorite YA authors, Holly Black, in celebration of her new book, the #1 New York Times bestselling The Wicked King. As you already know, this is the second novel in her Folk of the Air trilogy and the 10th novel she has written for young adults. I think that count is right. 10th?
I fear it may be more.
There might be more. That's the young adult novel count, but yeah, it could be more. In addition to this series, Holly Black is also the author of the modern Faerie series, the Curse Worker series, as well as the co-author of the Spiderwick Chronicles and the Magisterium series. She has been a finalist for the Eisner Award and the recipient of the Andre Norton Award and a Newbery Honor. So thank you so much for being here today, Holly.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
So how many people here have already read The Wicked King? All right.
So I'm in trouble.
And what'd you guys think of that ending? All right, so everyone who hasn't read it has some homework to do tonight. All right, so first things first, there are some people here who haven't read it yet, so can you give us a quick rundown on what we can expect from The Wicked King?
Sure. So if in The Cruel Prince, we ask the question of what Jude would be willing to do to get power, the Wicked King asks the question, what would she be willing to do to hold on to it? And she is, navigating what it means to be a ruler, or to be at least trying to pilot a ruler around like you are running one of those little underwater submarines. How to out-scheme the schemers and also their mermaids.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in this book. Yeah, so like you said, The Cruel Prince was definitely about gaining power, and this novel is very much about keeping it. What are some of the things that Jude does that you found particularly surprising that she does to keep power? Is there anything that she did that you were like, wow, Jude?
I mean, I wish that was my experience of writing. I've often heard people talk about how characters surprise them, and I'm not going to say that never happens, but for me, my characters are not often. They have a great deal of difficulty getting up and doing things. I don't think anybody wants to be in a book. It's terrible news, right? Bad things are going to happen to you, and so a lot of times I sit around thinking, what will Jude do? What can she do? No, really, what can she do? And, I go to my friends and I'm like, what can she do? And then I have to figure out something, and then I have to make it better. And then I have to make it better than that. And so that's often the process of writing. So what did she do that surprised me? I think that I make a story, and then as I'm running the characters through the story, I feel like the second draft for me is characters fighting plot. And so when they fight back, then the plot has to fight back again, and often that is the thing where I can think up something that is really going to, it's less me being surprised by Jude, but me being surprised of the thing that I can think of to do to Jude.
So it's you being surprised by yourself.
It's always, any which way. But the thing I'm often surprised by is I'm like, oh, that is a terrible thing to do to her. She would hate that. That's the stuff I'm often like, ha-ha.
See, and in my experience of reading your books, I feel like you must get to that point and then think, how can I make this a little bit worse?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in creating the character of Jude, who is just this fantastically ruthless character, did she sort of come to you fully formed, or was that sort of a process throughout the first book of her character kind of revealing itself to you?
I think that the thing that came to me was not so much some of her, but the origin story, the idea that she and her two sisters were raised by the person who murdered their parents and who became like their father. That was sort of the kernel of who she was. The idea that somebody who was raised like that would, no matter how nice a dad Matic is, You can't help but have like regular things be kind of fraught with tension, right? Like even, and so I think, I conceived of Jude as a character who was really good in stressful situations. In stressful situations, she was like, I got this. This is how things work. Things are always stressful. But in situations in which there was lower stress, she was like looking for danger. And so it would make her, not so great in those kinds of situations. And that was my idea of her.
Yeah, and I feel like her relationship with Maddox really influences so much of who she is and what she does. Because in a lot of ways, you're reading it and you're like, this seems like a fairly normal father-daughter interaction. And then something very weird will happen, and then you'll remember that he murdered her family, and you're like, this is not okay. And you're like, so in kind of constructing like those scenes, what do you think how do you put yourself inside of Jude's head in those moments?
I think, for me, creating her and creating that situation informed her such that would always be sort of a thing that I would come back to when I was sort of imagining myself into her head. But I think the hardest thing in the first draft was calibrating Maddox to be exactly like mean enough, but exactly nice enough, because I had drafts where people were like, well, I don't know why she would ever feel comfortable. And then I had drafts where people were like, he's such a great dad. Why is she so mean? And I was like, are you kidding me? People were like, oh, he's so nice. And I was like, okay, I need to make him like, it was actually harder. It was the hardest part was calibrating Maddox to behave in the ways that would allow the reader to access both the tension and also the caring.
And to a certain extent, I mean, my dad is a lovely human. He did not murder my family. But
I was wondering where this was going.
But I was like sometimes an asshole to him because I was a teenager and I was an asshole to everyone. So to a certain extent, is that like also something that you're kind of like mulling over in your mind? Like, okay, yes, Jude is going through these like terrible, exceptional situations, but she's also like 17, 18 years old and like doesn't know who she is yet.
I mean, I think that, you see the way in which, like, I think that Jude is too frightened to be an asshole in sort of normal ways, but Vivi isn't. And I think that is part of, like, that's part of what we see in the first book, that she doesn't feel, she feels just one step more comfortable because he's her biological father and because he did all this for her, and because she is able to stay really angry with him and also like kind of like mess with him a lot in ways that Jude is too frightened to do. But I definitely think that a big question of the series is like, at some point I think Jude realizes, wow, I might be a lot like him. I might be a lot like him. And by the end of this series, how much like him am I going to be? And how much like him do I want to be? If it takes being like Maddox to rule the world, do I want to be like Maddox?
And I mean, I could be wrong about this, but it also seems to a certain extent that she desires his pride in her, or, to a certain extent that he, approves of some of the things that she's doing. And so I do feel like there's an interesting push and pull between her not wanting to be him and also her wanting him to be proud of her.
I think that's true. I mean, I think that she thought that she was going to be really, a soldier, a knight in the military that he controlled. And I think that's, a thing that she kind of saw as being her, the shape of her fate. And as her fate changed, I think there is a part of her, I think there's a part of her that wants his approval. I think there's a part of her that wants revenge, right? I think that she's working that out. And I think, I think one of the big questions of Queen of Nothing, the third book, is going to be like, well, which way does she go? Like, does Maddox make it through this series?
So one thing that I had questions about as a reader is about the villains of this book, and kind of sort of rethinking in my mind all the time who is the actual villain. Maybe that's just me. Do you guys know who the villain is? Yeah. Would you say that anyone in this book is a villain, or is everyone a villain?
I mean, structurally, I mean, you mean a villain or an antagonist, right? Because I certainly take your point that it's complicated, right? But I think certainly Orla takes is in an antagonist position. Madoc is in an antagonist position, right? I think there's villainish. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, sure, everyone's got a little bit, little whiff of villainy.
I guess when you were writing it, did you kind of like say to yourself, like, this person is like really, going to be the bad guy, or this person is going to be the good guy? Or was it just sort of like all of them are going to be a little bad, all of them are a little good?
I mean, I was definitely thinking, when I was thinking about who's going to be the bad guy, I was thinking of it in a structural way. Like, I wasn't thinking who's going to be immoral. I was thinking who's going to, create conflict and, in what way. Like, who wants things in opposition to what Jude wants? Who wants things in opposition to what Cardan wants?
So do you think that Jude is the hero of this story? I guess she's the hero of her story, but is she the hero of the story?
Yeah, she's the hero of the story.
Okay.
Maybe she's the anti-hero of the story, right?
So I definitely want to talk a little bit about writing a second book. I know that it took a while to write The Cruel Prince. And then so coming into this one and having a year to write the sequel, what was that experience like, writing the second novel?
Well, so because we started early, because I got Cruel Prince in kind of early, I didn't feel too bad about, it wasn't too bad getting in Wicked King. It was okay. It was all right. I don't know. So last year when I went on tour for Cruel Prince, I decided that I needed to write faster. And I often decide that I hate my process and I'm going to do some random thing. Like, all my friends are used to me being like, okay, I got a way to fix my process. The next book's going to be really easy. But I read all of these books about... I read
all the writers are laughing.
I read all of these books about first structure and then writing really fast. And then I tried this thing. I tried fast drafting. So I did timed writing sprints, and I kept a journal about my drafting. And I wrote a lot of words. I'm not sure. I mean, how
many of those words made it?
It's a different question. All right, so here's the thing about me. I have never written a book that I didn't have to write wrong before I wrote right. My editor, Alvina, is here. She will recall that in Darkest Part of the Forest, I turned it in with three different villains. Unnerving, I am sure. And so I thought, well, even if I have to write everything wrong, then if I could just write it really fast and wrong, I will still be ahead of the game.
I mean, logically, it makes sense.
Exactly.
And it works, so I can't argue with it.
It's genius.
So is that the process that you took writing book 3 as well?
Yeah, that is what I did. Yeah, that actually is what I did for book 3, not book 2. Now that I'm remembering times and also dates. But it was, I don't know. It was definitely interesting that was the book I think I felt a little bit like, I've run out of time.
That's why you got that ending. No, I'm just kidding.
No, book 3.
I don't know what the ending of book 3 is.
Why is this a roast?
So I do want to talk about world building because I'm obsessed with the world that you have created, and you're obsessed with fairies, as indicated by your ears.
Oh yeah, they're healing pretty well.
So where did this story start? Did it start with Jude? Did it start with, the story of the political intrigue, or did it start with this world?
It started with the 3 girls and the murder of their parents and then being taken away. I imagined it at first actually as a high fantasy, as a secondary world high fantasy. And it was not quite coming together for me. And it was only when I realized I can put this in Faerie that it really took off and made sense and started to come together.
And in your writing of Faerie, were you, reading other sources where there were fairy worlds? Is this very much from your head? What was that process like of actually building the fairy world?
So I've been writing, fairy books for a long time, and this was the first time though that I set a book series entirely or almost entirely inside of Faerie, and I think that was really different because it meant, first of all, that there were things I couldn't elide anymore. Like I actually had to be like, all right, this is how it works. And also because there's so much folklore that you can draw from for world building generally with Faerie, but there isn't an enormous amount really inside of Faerie. Like a lot of times in folktales, when we go there very briefly. We go inside, like for instance, there might be a guy and he's got his lady wife and he finds a midwife and he's like, come with me and deliver this baby. And then they bring the midwife back and then the midwife delivers the baby and everything's a little weird. And he's got this pot of ointment. He wants the midwife to put on the eyes. And then she gets dropped off at a crossroads with her pocket full of gold. And then she accidentally wipes her own eye and it still has some ointment on it. And then she sees him at the market and he asks which eye she sees him with. And then he pokes at that eye. And but what you don't really get is a great description of the house. And so, yeah, I had to make up some stuff.
So I mean, as a reader and a writer, I'm always curious about like which drafts the world building goes into, and if you write this shell of a story that doesn't really have all these details, and then you kind of go back and add stuff, or did you write any backstory that didn't even make it?
I mean, I think so much of Faerie is like, I think it's different to build a world when you're building a world from the ground up than it is when you're building a world based on folklore. And even though I joke, there still is an enormous amount of folklore out there that establishes the rules of the world, how fairies behave, what kind of taboos they have. And, for that, a lot of times I go back to sort of primary sources of people who went out into the field and talked to folks who had real experiences with fairies, experiences where they talk about their family or themselves, like meeting some folk. And I will tell you a story that is from Dermot McManus's The Middle Kingdom, and he went out and got these different stories. And this is about a guy who so there's a guy, he's getting married. He wants to build a house for he and his new wife. He needs to find a piece of land to build on, and he finds a great piece of land. It is so nice. It is by 2 rivers. It's perfect. And he thinks, why has no one built on this land before? Oh, well. He builds a house. He gets married. He and his wife move in. They live there until the first full moon, when it sounds like there is a train going by outside and the walls are shaking and pots and pans are banging and preserves are falling to the ground. And his wife is glaring at him like, what have you done? And so he's not sure that the house is going to hold together, but it does. He makes it through the night. And when morning comes, he belatedly goes to the local sort of expert on the supernatural in their town and says, if someone, not me, but someone were to have built their house on this land, what would you tell them? And she says, well, they got good news and bad news. Bad news is you built your house on a fairy path. And, fairies, they don't go around things. The good news is you only built a corner of your house on the fairy path. And so if you ever find this book, again, don't remember, this is The Middle Kingdom, there is a photo in it of this house with the corner cut off. And he and his wife lived there till the end of their days. And, everything was fine. But on full moon nights, there would be a wind that would go by and take the corner. And I think, coming back to folklore, not just for like the specific rules of the world, but also for the feeling of the world, right? The feeling of the supernatural bumping up against the mundane. And like that kind of, frisson, that to me is also a thing you go back to, is the feeling. And for me, a lot, too often to my misfortune, a lot of the way that I go through a story is to figure out, does this give me that weird feeling that I want it to give me?
I feel like I've read a modern day version of that story as like a Twitter thread, like one of those like I bought a haunted house Twitter threads.
Right. I mean, fairy stories often have a lot of relation, like a lot of things. There are a lot of the, textual things that are like ghost stories.
Yeah. What would you say is like the weirdest or spookiest thing that you came across while researching for this book, or that you Googled?
I mean, I think that the most gruesome thing is often that I'm like, what would this wound look like? And I have two friends who are doctors. Actually, one of them is Cassie Clare's best friend, and so often they get hit up to be like, so if if someone wounded somebody else in this way, or wounded themselves, or like, what would this wound really, like, how would it play out? What would the healing be? Like, they have to answer a lot of,
how much would it bleed?
How much would it bleed? How soon could they swing around a sword again? Like,
at what point would they go unconscious?
Like that weird button solution in the first book, that was all Dr. Eric. He was like, here, this is what she could do. It totally would work. I mean, I'm not sure it would work, but it's a doctor. Who am I to,
Dr. Eric said so.
Dr. Eric said so.
No, but I think that what you're saying about the feeling is very true. And backstage, you and I were talking about King of Scars, Leigh Bardugo's book that's coming out, which is incredible. And I think that's one of those things that she does really well with her world building, is that her world has so much texture. There's all this mythology that she's written, and there's all of these things that kind of go on outside of that main plot. Is that something that you've also done, like maybe created, mythologies or fairy tales of your worlds, even if it's just in your head?
I think sometimes, I think I don't usually create something unless I think it's going to have something to do with the book. Like, I'm not just sitting around like, oh, here I am. I'm so bored today. Let me come. I'm often like, often like, oh God, I gotta finish this. I can't, but there's things in the book that I've come up with that I feel like, I didn't necessarily are sort of building out pieces. Like, I think that a world feeling full is a world that has stories that aren't always relevant to the plot in them, and trying to find those places where there's weird moments, or there's other people's stories that are in there. Or like, I'm working on Queen of Nothing now, and like having them, they talk about, there's a part where, there's a discussion of fairy tales, and there's some, odd fairy tales in there. So I think that's true, but I don't think I have ever, fully made something, like a whole separate thing, beautifully made, just for myself. A tale I've told myself.
You're like crushing all my like romantic dreams of being a writer.
And that's my, if I could think of one sort of slogan for me, that would be like, that's my thing, right? Want me to tell you how terrible it is to be a writer? I will.
So I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience in about 10 minutes. But before then, I do want to talk a little bit about Cardan. I know. You guys thought I missed him. I didn't. So, of course, he's the cruel prince from the first book. I think he maybe undergoes some changes in The Wicked King. Do you think that Cardan is still the cruel prince at heart?
I mean, that's there were a lot of people vying for the title in the first book. I think that, to me, the core of Cardan is he is a person who sort of asserted himself as, I am terrible, and very, very scary. And Jude, for Jude, she was almost symbolic of an enormous number of her fears. And so when he said, I am terrible, she thought, and I am terrified. Like, I am really, really frightened, and I will become as terrible as you are. I will become more terrible than you. And when she confronted him and was like, finally, I have become more terrible than you. And now, finally we will have our encounter. We will fight. And he is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. When I said I was terrible, like I meant, just sort of like mean. Like I am not in this league at all. You are killing people. And so to me, that's the core of his character. And he is for real a jerk. But, he's not the specific kind of terrible that she thought he was.
Have any of you guys seen New Girl? Like when Winston always takes the jokes like way too far. I feel like that's like Jude in The Wicked King. No, but the relationship between Cardon and Jude is very interesting. And I feel like the push and pull between them is just so fascinating. And what was it like writing that relationship?
I'm very interested in power and power reversals. And I think that their relationship is all about sort of power dynamics and power reversals. And that was why, that was the thing that I was most interested in. So when I was on tour in the UK for The Cruel Prince, I remember over and over I would get this question, when does book 2 start? Like it would be like the last question, like the most important question. I thought, this question does not seem that interesting. Like what is, you know what I mean? It's like interesting, but it doesn't seem like the question that people would ask with their like really needing to know. And finally, somebody was asking the question and they said, because, I just want to know, like, I'm afraid it's going to start after the year and a day is up. I really want to see her control him. And then they said, and then I want to see him have his turn. And I was really oh, finally I get what you want. Like, I finally get what this question is about. But I think it does cut to yeah, I know, the kinksters, right? They really, they just put it out there. But it really cut to the heart of the business.
Sorry, I'm just so excited for the Q&A later when I open it up. And no, but actually, is that something that you thought about? Like at what point you were going to open up book 2?
I did. I knew what I was gonna I knew what I was interested in doing. So no. But it certainly opened my eyes, I think, to what the pleasures were, what I needed to make sure I did.
How to please your audience.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, I'm gonna do
Oh, y'all look scandalized. Wait, I didn't say it.
I'm going to do a quick lightning round
of
questions, and then we are going to open it up to you guys. So please have some good questions, like this caliber of good questions. All right, number 1. Your favorite book growing up was?
How old? How old am I?
Let's say teenager. What was your favorite book as a teenager?
Interview with the Vampire. I read it when I was in 8th grade. I read that book every night. I would reread it.
Oh my gosh. The YA book you wish you had written is?
6 of Crows.
Yeah.
Wow. Like, as one, we were all like,
Yeah. The YA heroine you wish you could be for a day?
Oh, God. Oh, no. I pass. I don't know. Wait, I'll come back.
All right.
I'll come back.
The book you're reading right now? Or the last book you read?
Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver.
Oh, it's a good one.
It was good. Still stuck on YA heroine, who I want to be.
If you could have any writer in the world, living or dead, blurb your book, who would it be? Maybe Anne Rice. I really would like it. No, or Tanith Lee, who is sadly departed.
but whose work I
I mean, that'd be quite a feat to get like the ghost to do a blurb.
You said living or dead.
I know, but it would be awesome.
Yates.
If you could write any place in the world or in any world, where would it be?
If I could write in any place, under the sea, under the water, like maybe in the bottom of a pool. I would really like to write in a pool. I've often thought how sad it is I can't write in a pool.
Like gills and everything, like
whatever.
full mermaid?
I don't know. It does seem like a problem, right? It's a technological
there are
problem.
problems with the question for sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Awesome. So I do want to open it up to your guys' questions. Does anybody want to get us started? All right, let's start with you back there.
So I'm an English teacher, and one of the struggles that we always come up against is getting refreshing literature in our classrooms, and especially fiction and fantasy. So what would be your elevator pitch to an administrator about why fiction and especially fantasy needs to be incorporated into curriculum?
oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Thank you for not making a pitch for me. I was like, oh no, I don't want to. No, why does fantasy have to be, why is fantasy useful? I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that because some readers are going to be fantasy readers and it's going to appeal to them in a way that nothing else will. But also fantasy gives an opportunity to talk about things that we often talk about one way and then talk about them slant. It gives us an opportunity to, for instance, like look at the story of the werewolf, right? We all experience anger. We all experience anger that is overwhelming enough that we're afraid we might say or do something that will hurt the people we most care about, right? But when you tell a story about a werewolf, you don't ask the commonplace questions about anger. You don't say, well, why don't they just not be angry, right? You can't just, why don't they just not be a werewolf, right? You get to tell different stories about anger. And fantasy gives us that opportunity. And it gives us also sometimes that one step of remove that allows access to something that maybe is too close to read about directly.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, let's do you up here.
Hi. So when I first started reading The Cruel Prince, I was kind of struck by how unusual the name Jude is for like a fantasy. Like I really think when I picture the name Jude, I just think about how I just think of like a surfer character kind of. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I guess my question is about like how you find names, especially for like some of the more weirder characters.
I feel like I often come up with characters and then I have to spend a lot of time looking at names until the name fits right. And the character doesn't really come to life until they have the right name. And so I tried a lot of different names on Jude until I found Jude. And I have a tendency to like I have a tendency to like a short, somewhat gender neutral name for female heroes. Like I don't know why. I just really like them. I tried them on, and I go to baby name sites. If you go to Nameberry, what's great about Nameberry is that their users have like taken over like the subterranean tunnels of Nameberry. And so you have these user lists that are clearly for writers. They're like vampire names. And I mean, look, I support anyone who made this list for someone, for their baby. Like I am there for you, but I don't think they did. And so there's a lot of user lists that are really great and really useful for writers and also for, people who want to name their babies
And
after
also
vampires.
Expecting vampires.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Is there anyone in the back? I don't want to miss you guys back there. All right, can we do you in the gray sweater? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, because Jude and Cardan are both kind of cruel and wicked in their own ways, what characteristic do they like about each other that they're each attracted to? Because they seem to just be mean a lot and do, savage sort of things. So what would be that like redeeming quality that they're like, oh, I like this person?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't undersell the fact that having that in common isn't the worst basis for fellow feeling. But I think that I think that they have, although they've had very different experiences and very different upbringings, I think they both know what it's like to pretend to be something you're not, and I think they both know what it's like to wear a mask, and I think that. When Jude wound up putting a knife to Cardan's throat, I think there was a real aspect to his reaction of being like, yeah, okay, like, fair enough. I guess I didn't think it would go this way, but like where she felt like he understood her in a way that I don't think that she was used to being understood. And I think it was very disturbing that he was the one who did understand her that way.
Hi. I don't know if you can
Hi.
tell us, but what was Vivian's congratulations gift to Cardan?
I mean,
I'm dying to know what it was.
I mean, you will definitely find out.
Find
I can't.
out.
Yeah, you'll find out.
That's a great question.
That was a good question.
Yes, let's do you over here. I'm gonna try to, yeah.
I have two questions. One, where did you come up with Cardan's tail?
Yeah, I was wondering that.
I had wanted to have a tail on a character for a while. I had been thinking about a tail for a while. Yeah. Finally, I got to have one.
And the second question is for the coldest girl in Cold Town. Like, do you ever think you'll revisit that book?
I do. I think I will. I would really like to. I have an idea of what might happen. I had an idea, and then I had a different idea, and now I have an even different idea than that idea. But I have, I'm hopeful. It is, in my editor's hands. but yeah, I would really like to. Yeah. Yes, I do get this question, and usually I say that, but it's not usually so pressuring for you. But yeah, it's not going to be the next thing, and it's probably not going to be the next thing after that, but it might be the next thing after that.
What is the next thing?
I'm still trying to figure that out, but I have a couple of different ideas, and there's a couple. There is a fairy thing that I'm thinking about. A couple other things I'm thinking about. Yeah. Actually, this is really weird. This is the first time. So when I finish this book, I'm done. I'm done. I gotta really. I'm out of contract for the first time in like a really long time. So I'm excited because I get to now make a new plan and, that I can't get out of for many years. But for a minute, I'm like, woohoo, done. Lay around.
Under the pool.
Under the
Right.
where I like to be.
Right here.
So without giving away spoilers, in book 2, we may or may not have reasons to root for Cardan. Are we going to maybe have more reasons to maybe root for him in book 3?
Well, if you come out of book 2 thinking of reasons to root for Cardan, then I'm sure that you'll be fine in book 3.
Can you give us any sneak peeks at what we can expect in book 3?
Sure. So the thing that Jude has always been afraid of is being in the mortal world, like having to navigate that world. And so she starts out book 3 having to do that, and we get to see what that might have been like, or what it would, what that would look like for her. And that was really fun for me because she, this is really the thing she never wanted.
Is it? I always love reading the parts where she's in the mortal world because it's like all of a sudden, like, the mortal world is like her fantasy world in the sense that it's like not what she's used to.
Right. She's like,
Like-
let me order off this
Yeah,
bizarre
there's a
menu.
diner scene that's delightful. Yeah, and they order like weird stuff too, don't they? They order like pickles and like and they're like,
Fried pickles are delicious.
yeah, no, it's not weird, but it was like a strange combination of things. Or she
Yeah.
orders like an omelet, and I'm like, really? You're not, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to like nitpick at her dine order, but it was like.
Harsh.
Yes, let's go right here with Danielle.
Hi, Holly.
I've always wanted to know, do you think that you could survive your own fairy kingdom?
No.
You would be dead? No, come on!
Sorry.
Never?
I mean,
You know all the rules, so would you be
I would
able
be-
to be all powerful? I feel like you would be. No?
No, I would be like, oh, look at that delicious food. Oh, look at a beautiful fairy ring. Let's go for a dance. I mean, Holly. I know. But there's all that honey wine and I don't know.
Fine, you ruined it.
I mean, as I get older, I suppose I would be like, oh, dancing seems hard. And, I don't see they don't have any coffee. Like maybe I would do better now than I would have.
Awesome. Let's do the blue and black striped sweater.
Hi. So, we talked about Maddox, but I'm actually kind of curious about Oriana because she ended up being one of my favorite characters. And I guess it was interesting because she was kind of in the background for most of like the first half. Like she was there, but you didn't really get to know her until more towards the end and all of the, it was like slow and then in your face. But I guess I wanted to know what it was like to kind of construct her as a character and the balance of like ramping her up into her significance that came out later, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, I think that, like what interested me about her was her marriage to Maddox and the ways in which it is, like she is a character who she is not a very loving or not a stepmother, but like foster mother, I guess, like she's not, but she is not a bad one. She's, like kind in her way. Right. And I think she continues to sort of try and figure out like what to do with these human girls and like how what kind of relationship she has to them, because they seem to her to be sort of figures of danger. And I think it's good to know by the end of the first book more of a sense of like why she's so worried about danger and what danger she's specifically worried about, and like how like what her background is and maybe how she came to be with Maddox, and how kind of complicated their relationship is. But it's hard to talk about her because she is sort of so linked to Maddox that as we move through the series, her decisions about like how far she's willing to go with Maddox and like what does that mean, and like how much does she care about these kids and what does she want for Oak, become continue to be important, because she has her voice is really important to Oak and to the girls.
Skipped over.
Yeah.
Hi. I want to ask about two kind of elements of Fairyland that I really love, which is one is kind of the craftsmanship and the kind of objects of wonder. Like you have the acorn in the first book and all this awesome metalwork and all these absolutely beautiful gowns. And then kind of connected, at least to the gowns, is the revelry. That's just so much fun to read. And I'm wondering both those kind of technical world building objects and, clothing, and then also these awesome party scenes. Is that fun to write? How does that work for you?
Definitely fun to write. Yeah. I mean, the revels are really fun to write. The dresses are fun to write about. I think the objects are tricky because they need to play through, and whenever they are introduced, then there is an object that could a potential power that I have to remember and like make sure it like doesn't undercut sort of the story and the plot. But they are certainly fun to describe. I do love describing things, and when you're talking about like, world building, like I really, sometimes my first drafts are more skeletal than not. And so going back through and like deepening that language and like really getting to, indulge in more and more, description, specifically of many debaucherous rebels is really enjoyable. And, one of the great pleasures of revision.
Yeah. Just follow up to that. What would you say is your favorite part of writing these books?
I mean, I think that it definitely is the revision. It's definitely the part where I get to really work on the precision of language, and really make sure, I mean, not just like in terms of like, oh, I'm going to describe this cool scene, but also like exactly what do characters say to each other? Like, how do I make the thing that they say to each other the exact right thing that they would say that carries the, the meaning that is going to make you have a feeling, right, about it. And, a lot of times in first drafts is not quite right. The things they said some stuff, but like, going through and like cleaning that up is pleasurable in it, especially when you have the time to really like sit with it and do it.
Yeah, I imagine like it's when you're in the shower after like having a fight with someone and you think of all the things you could have said and it's like perfect. That's revisions.
Exactly. That is a great metaphor.
Let's do one more question. Let's do the yellow sweater back here.
So I was just wondering, so let's say there's an adaptation for your series. Like, which actors and actresses would you choose for Jude or Cardan?
So I did a series called The Spider Chronicles, which is for much younger readers, and it was an adaptation in 2008. And so I went through that process, and from that process, I will say I would never choose any, but like, please just let them be good. That's all I want. I have no dog in this fight except that they are good and that they, that's all I care about. And because it'll never, what I mean? It'll never matter anyway. And often, like that. So yeah, I never, and I also like in my head, they're not those people. They're the people I'm picturing. And so they'll always not be right to me anyway. So yeah, that's all I care about.
Actually, that was short, so we can do one more question.
Sorry, I'm the worst at that question.
Let's do Clarabelle.
Could be a two-part.
Oh, okay. So she's part 2. I'm part 1. Ooh. It's fine. I'm sorry.
Wow, some stuff is happening.
I know. It's dramatic over here. So you've said that Jude is half Latinx before. Mm-hmm. Did you have any sort of specific country that you thought of her being from?
What I said, and because it was to you, right? That was that her dad's family is Latinx, but I actually thought of them as being in the U.S. for a while, like not, and not necessarily being all Latinx themselves. Like I think that one of the interesting things about writing about Americans is that we often have are from more than one place and have our ancestry is commingled. Yeah. And so I assumed that the Duarte household was a multiracial household, like that they were part Latinx, but that what I mean. Yeah. And so I didn't have a specific place that they were from. I would have to figure that out if we ever actually figure out more about, like I had been like, okay, I know a little bit about them and I wonder if we will ever find out more about, Jude's family. But so far we have we know a very little bit about Justin. And I try not to make extremely specific decisions about characters until we can bring them on, because I'm like, oh, I might need that. Yeah. That is a terrible truth, but I feel like I might need to know some other stuff. So that's like the little bit I know about Justin Duarte's family.
Okay. Thank you. We see characters from your first fairy book, Tithe, in The Cruel Prince, and they have a debt to collect with Jude, and now that she's vulnerable, is that something that's going to play into book 3?
Oh no, sorry. Yes. I'm like, how much can I answer this? Kind of. Yes.
I'm excited.
I mean, it's complicated, right? Because she did the thing. That's why I'm like, how do I? Because she did the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, boy, did she. So yes, you'll see them. Yes, you'll see the repercussions. But like, she did
the thing.
She did the thing. They don't, she doesn't really owe the thing anymore because she did it.
On that note, thank you so much for being here today, Holly, and for writing this fantastic book.